The Underneath, Part 5, Disarmed. Adeena followed the others beyond the trees, exiting onto a small, one-way road pressed so close to the back that roots and vines had grown out onto the sidewalk. She looked around, but no one else seemed to occupy the area, leaving them in the shade. Parked on the edge of the road sat a small, light green sedan, and as sinister voices whispered through the trees at Adeena's back, she shuddered, hurrying toward the car. "How did you get this?" she asked, opening the door. Ahab and John traded glances. Ahab mumbled. "We asked nicely?" "Sure you did," Adeena retorted, scratching the back of her hand. The numbness had spread from the size of a quarter to almost silver dollar size, but she saw no rash or bite marks, so she told herself not to worry. "Fair warning, though," John said. "We've been compromised, so there's been a change of plans." Ahab nodded. "Our time is severely limited. We're headed to the playground right now to rescue Natik and the other overhead children." "How are you going to do that?" inquired Adeena, trying to massage circulation back into her now fully numb hand. John turned around and pointed to a box that sat next to Adeena. Ahab built an electrical pulse device that should be powerful enough to shut down the site's defenses. From what we can tell, it's mostly guarded by Annies, with a few sleep policemen to cover redundancies. The EMP will cripple them long enough for us to find the kids and get out. "Then what?" Adeena pressed. "We have nowhere to go." "Not here, no," John agreed. "But I have a safe house back in the overhead. We'll all go back through the gap you entered earlier today. Recently accessed gaps have a weaker breach threshold." "And I know how to exploit that," Ahab added, stroking Trina's hair while she sat in his lap. The numbness began to crawl past Adeena's wrist, and she frowned, vigorously rubbing her arm. Suddenly, cold, sharp steel found its way under her throat, and she stared into the coal-black eyes of a blood-soaked ventriloquist dummy. The knife in the doll's hand pressed against her jugular, and Adeena held her breath, wide-eyed. "Someone's got a secret," Trina whispered in an excited sing-song voice. "Sorry, she's just reacting to biological readings," Ahab apologized. John sighed. "You couldn't make her less creepy, though, could you?" "Look," Ahab snapped, "when you know how to remap an artificial consciousness from scratch, you can have an opinion on her personality quirks, okay?" "Blood pressure elevated," Trina continued. "Major fluid loss registered, along with diminishing muscle mass." "Wait, what?" Ahab said, spinning around in his seat. "She's not bleeding. She looks fine." "Well, my left hand is kind of numb," Adeena admitted, "but I don't think it's—" "Stop the car," Ahab commanded, and John obliged. Both exited the vehicle, gesturing for Adeena to follow. "What's going on?" demanded Adeena, stepping onto the sidewalk. "Trina," Ahab said, ignoring the girl. "Scan Adeena for foreign bodies. Left arm." Trina's black eyes flickered green for a few seconds. "Widow beetle nest present, descending from forearm to elbow." I'm sorry, what's present?" Adeena cried. Ahab retrieved his heat ray gun. "John, do you have a mouth guard?" John reached back into the car, rolling up what appeared to be a washcloth. "This may have to do." "Okay." Ahab closed his eyes. "Restrain her." John reached around Adeena from behind, forcing the wad of cloth into her mouth as she struggled. Holding her head and neck in place with one arm, he used his other hand to extend her left arm. She tried to pull away, screaming, but her cries were muffled past the washcloth. "I'm so sorry, Adeena," Ahab whispered, adjusting the controls on his heat ray gun. Trina came to the boy, and he took aim at her knife, depressing the trigger. After a few seconds, the edge of the blade turned orange, smoking a little as the dried blood vaporized. "Trina," Ahab said, fiddling with the gun again. "Please proceed." Immediately, so quickly that Adeena hardly registered the movement at first, Trina leapt into the air, slicing the knife down into her left arm with enough force to sever the appendage right past the elbow, the heat of the metal cauterizing the wound in the process. Her arm landed on the sidewalk, crumbling into a mass of thousands of tiny ladybug creatures like the ones she'd encountered in the forest. Before they could scatter, Ahab took aim with his heat ray, and the insects burst into flames, disintegrating into ash. John released Adeena, and she ripped the cloth from her mouth, sobbing hysterically. "You cut off my fucking arm!" Ahab held out his hands in apology. "I'm sorry. I didn't have a choice. Widow beetles infect and multiply inside animal tissue like a virus, replacing the cells with more of themselves. If we had waited even a few more minutes, they would have reached beyond your arm, to your brain and your lungs. I did this to save you." "Ah!" Adeena screamed animalistically, running forward to kick Trina. The dummy casually sidestepped the attack, watching Ahab for further directions, and Adeena stumbled forward, almost falling. Before she could collapse, though, John and Ahab were there, holding her up. Leaning into John's ribcage, she let out another scream, this one devolving into more tears of loss and pain. "I'm so sorry," Ahab whispered quietly. "I'll make you a new arm, a better arm, I promise." An hour later, Adeena, John, Ahab, and Trina sat inside their questionably attained sedan, examining the nondescript building across the street. It seemed rather dull and gray, like a basic warehouse, but Adeena spied old, unlit neon signs hanging off the walls, covered in phrases like "fun for the family" and "free food for adults over 40. "This is it," Ahab said. "I have a rough map of the interior. Once we activate my EMP, we'll be lucky to have 5 minutes before the sleep police on site catch on and reroute powers to the Annies. Then we'll be on borrowed time." He reached over to the now open box next to Adeena, retrieving a device that looked like an old VCR with a small satellite dish mounted on top. Angling the dish toward the playground, he pressed a few buttons, and the device hummed to life. Ahab grabbed Trina, who was examining the EMP, and pulled her up to the front seat, plopping her back into his lap. "Sorry, Trina," he said, "but trust me, you don't want to be in front of that thing when it fires." As the EMP primed, Adeena reached to her elbow-length stump where the other half of her arm used to be. "All right," Ahab announced, counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2, fire. The satellite dish bucked a little, and across the street, the neon signs lit up for a second before exploding in a shower of sparks. Though the street had felt quiet before, it seemed even more so now, as if a noise beyond Adeena's conscious registration had also fallen silent. Ahab typed a few commands into the EMP, reading the metrics on a small screen embedded near the bottom. "No more electrical readings from inside the building," he confirmed aloud. "I think it worked." "Now what?" Adeena asked, letting go of her arm stump. John retrieved his shotgun, loading fresh shells into the breech. "They call it the playground, right? Let's go play."